You should be on call too. This is a contentious topic, right? So earlier, Mike had said that speakers spend 6 to 8 weeks preparing their presentations, but unfortunately, most speakers only find out that their talk was accepted about 3 weeks ago, which means that they write their talk on the plane, on the way to the conference, which is why we're nervous, because we've never given the talk before. But we worry about it for a lot longer, for about 3 weeks. The timing for the talk today is pretty fortunate because we didn't know the schedule until, 3 weeks ago, maybe 3 days ago, I don't remember. But I know that everybody's actually staying only because they want to hear Jesse talk about chat ops at GitHub. So I do, and so you have to bear with me for this talk instead. All right, so who am I? First of all, why am I qualified to talk to you how you should be on call? Well, I work for Opscode, and we have people that are on call, and we do operations stuff. We have some automation software that some people might have heard of, may or may not. I'll talk about that a little bit. But in my role at Opscode, I'm a community manager, which means I'm not actually on call because I'm not in operations. So that means, why am I telling you about why you should be on call? Well, actually, for the majority of my career, I've been a systems administrator. So I've carried a pager. I've Arch Wireless, Represent, works in every data center ever. But I'm kind of on call in my community manager role because I support our community and community cookbooks, and the cookbooks that I write that people run in their infrastructure, and I answer questions on Twitter and IRC and through GitHub pull requests, and if you have my Skype ID, which is on my business card, and it's not hard to find because it's my same Twitter, I'm same thing everywhere, so pretty easy to get a hold of if you have a problem and you need help with Chef. So I'm kind of on call anyway, in a way. But aside from being a systems administrator, I'm a man of many interests. I'm a father, I'm a gamer, and in the last year I've gotten into CrossFit. One of the things about being a systems administrator is my career has led to interruptions, and one of those interruptions is that my son's birthday is today. And so it's the first birthday of his that I've missed, and so just on a count of 3, can I get a happy birthday, Ethan? 1, 2, 3.
Happy birthday, Ethan!
Thank you. Thank you. All right. So I'm a big fan of audience participation. And we've been sitting for a while, so let's have a show of hands on this topic. So who's a sysadmin or ops person? All right. Who's a developer? Who's a sysadmin that writes code as a developer? Like the overlap? Okay. Got a pretty good mix. Who's business people? And this includes consultants. Managers, directors, that sort of thing. Okay. Who writes code and is a director and manages people? Yeah. They say that managers don't actually write code, but we know if you have free time, you write code, right? Can't stop. Who's on call for production outages? Not as many hands. All right. Who's using Chef? All right. That's what I like to see. So let's talk about Chef. Actually, I'm not going to talk about Chef, of course. But I submitted several Chef talks for this conference, but then they picked this one. So, maybe I'll have something to say about it. So let's talk about pagers. And after all, one of the essential parts of DevOps is that every developer should carry a pager, right? That's the cultural aspect of it, that we're going to share the blame, the responsibility, right? No, that's not culture. This isn't about the flame war. This is more about operations people need your help. So if you're a developer that writes code, operations folks need your help. We talked about this earlier. We've heard Gene and others say things like developers can help make their applications operable, write tools, and that sort of thing. And so, we need help, but that's not to say that we're hiring, but of course, everybody's hiring, so Opscode is hiring. No, but the help is on the behest of the business. So you have a company that is running some application that developers wrote and operations people put into production. And when the developers wrote it, it worked on my machine, which is, of course, irresponsible, and it leads to roadblocks by operations people saying, no, you cannot deploy. Except, now we've heard some things about how, we're going to do 10 deploys a day, 15 deploys a day, continuous deploy all the time. We're just going to run cap deploy in a for loop and while one, right? That's continuous deployment, right? All right. So this is actually about the idea of collaboration and sharing, and not sharing of on-call, but sharing responsibility for the application that you wrote and that we run in the us versus them, the slide earlier with Spock versus Scotty and that whole thing. But it's about the collaboration and the knowledge sharing and transfer aspect. So this makes a nice segue into a story about silos and the separation of duties. So I used to work for a large enterprise IT services company. And we did systems administration, and we only did, in my group, systems administration because we were siloed off. And this is for separation of duties reasons like some COBIT or ITIL or some IT service management methodology said that, sysadmins can't, run the application, and network engineers can't create users and that sort of thing. So what this meant was that the sysadmins were on call for all of the OS level things running on the system. So your application running on a server under Tomcat or JBoss or Rails or whatever it might be, is a thing that's running on the system. It's listening to network ports, and so obviously systems administrators have to be responsible for that. So we carried one of those. Literally, Arch Wireless, represent. I had one of those for 7 years. It was most annoying thing. But they're indestructible, I've found. You can throw them at walls, and they will never break. It's amazing. So the team I was on had a hot pager, and that was the on-call person rotation every week that person would be the primary point of contact for any issue that was happening on the systems. And then there was an escalation path to the person that was the primary for a particular customer account, and then there was escalations that usually went to management, to directors, to further up the internal tool chain, or management chain. And the sysadmins were responsible for the OS stuff, the file systems, network services, host-based firewalls, or we did IP tables-F, never do that. We were responsible for things like security policy, user management, that sort of thing. We weren't responsible for writing out context.xml or database YAML stuff. That was all left up to the developers. We didn't do any schema migrations or anything like that. That was all done by the DBAs because it was Oracle or DB2 or some big thing that required 5 certifications and $1 bazillion. So we had typical problems that would come in from the help desk. They get something like a disk full alert. And the help desk would page out whoever was on call. And then the on-call person would look at the system, and they go, oh, that's a file system on the customer data. I'll page the customer's primary sysadmin and have him take a look at it. So we page him out. Primary sysadmin wakes up. This always happens at 2 to 3 in the morning. This never happens at 2 in the afternoon when you're lazy after lunch, right? So the primary sysadmin looks at the system, and he doesn't know what is going on in this file system. Maybe there's 500 gigs worth of logs on a 498 gig file system. That's kind of terrible. But which one of those log files do we delete? We don't know. So we'll page out application support, the application developer. Sometimes that's the customer. Sometimes that's another part of another business unit in this giant IT organization that I worked in. But this is the common example. These kinds of alerts came in all the time. We didn't know necessarily the best way to resolve this kind of application-specific sort of thing. Repeat this for the CPU utilization. Maybe the application just sits on the CPU all day because it's supposed to, because why would you buy all these CPUs and then not use them, right? Or memory utilization. Why do you buy 4 gigs of memory and then not use 4 gigs of memory for the app, right? And this is all great, and we love having metrics and monitoring for our applications. That's wonderful, but the problem is that metrics-based alerting generally sucks. It's a gross generalization, but these kinds of alerts aren't actionable. This is where you get things like alert fatigue. And so you're getting all these metrics-based, application-specific alerts coming in, and we have no idea what to do. And it isn't even necessarily indicative of the problem. Maybe it isn't actually a problem, like I said. We want to use the CPU, we want to use the memory, Maybe we don't want to use all the disk, but that's another story. So we don't necessarily know why we got an alert or where to look from the outside. Like the on-call guy, he has to page out the sysadmin, and she's got to log in and look at it. And then I don't know what's going on. And if it's like something like the application itself is down or we couldn't connect to the database, table flip, right? I have no idea what I'm doing. But it's cool. I love CrossFit. This is me doing thrusters. And if you want to meet at the Little America lobby tomorrow morning at 6:45, I'm going to do a CrossFit WOD somewhere. We'll find a place, so meet me there. But anyway, so I'm going to try some science. I did some case studies. And by case studies, I mean I talked to some people that work for these 5 companies because I only had 3 days to do my talk, and it's hard to make phone calls when you're on an airplane. So I talked to Opscode, Director of Operations. I talked to former Director of Technical Operations at Heroku, VP of Operations at Etsy, Director of, I forget, another Operations Director. I think he's at SourceFire, but I don't remember if his title is Director or VP. And then I also talked to the guy that's running operations at Custom Inc. And the general gist is that these companies all have developers as the primary on-call. Or they did at the time that I talked to them, or they did at some point, and they've reverted for various reasons, but the details of that are less interesting. One of the things about Opscode is we've got a number of folks that used to work at Amazon, and Amazon's CTO, Werner Vogels, said in an interview, you build it, you run it. Because at Amazon, if you built it, you run it. Similarly, earlier we heard that at Google for 6 months, developers build it and they maintain it for a while, and they take care of it. So Opscode developers are on call. Heroku's developers are on call. They instituted that after Mark was there for a while. Etsy has a special way that they do on-call. Some of the developers, they've got a lot of developers there, so they've got some developers that are on-call for only their application. Some of them share a pool for other things, so they've got a tiered structure. But they have people who wrote the code that then help run the code in production. SourceFire has started implementing this, and recently Custom Inc. started, and then they've reverted back, but they're working to correct that and continue with the idea that the developers are helping run the code, helping run the code in production. Generally speaking, and this is also other companies that I've talked to just like anecdotally, because I don't have any real data. I didn't do a white paper. Like I said, I had my 3 hours on a flight. But generally, most companies have more developers than they have sysadmins. How many people work in a company with more than 5 developers? How many people work in a company that has more than 5 sysadmins? Only a few of the same hands, right? There's not a lot of companies that have that, even have 5 sysadmins, right? So you guys outnumber us. Let's go us versus them, but there's more developers to sysadmins. It stands to reason that we shouldn't have our sysadmins get burned out and angry and this fighting about, every time I get paged, I get grumpy, and the developers are out, at the pub after shipping, like we've heard those stories before. So we want to help share the load in that we help make people responsible, and this betters the business. The other thing is that developers have this application domain knowledge, strangely enough. When you write some code, usually you remember how it works and all the little nuances of it. I don't necessarily remember how all the code I wrote works, but sometimes I go back and I look at, when did I write that? But fortunately there's a Git log that tells me when. Another thing that I found in these conversations is that people like taking accountability and responsibility for this stuff. It's empowering, and it helps them feel good about an accomplishment of, yeah, I put that into production. Like earlier, we heard the victory dance of writing some code and then you deploy it, rather than having to wait 6 months because there's an operations roadblock that says, no, last time we deployed, it broke the site, so you can't do any deploys anymore. So that responsibility is empowering. And people don't like stress. And what I mean by stress is twofold. Because first, there's more with more developers, so there's more people to share that load. But the operations won't be stressed out, which improves team morale, and there isn't that resentment about who's, it's easier to have blameless postmortems when people aren't grumpy about, how they're always getting paged out because the site's always breaking, right? Those kinds of scenarios. Some other overall results, I found out that a lot of people use Nagios and PagerDuty as popular tools. So knowing how Nagios works is pretty useful. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about operating applications, but being able to write Nagios checks for your application is a seriously big help for the operations team. And if you can write part of the application that Nagios can hit, like a URL that can return some status information, that's super helpful, because then you can get actual alerts that determine whether the behavior of the app is correct or incorrect. In general, the operations or sysadmin teams are an escalation point, or they pair with and work with the developers. So it makes it easier to do that knowledge transfer, and it's easier to ask questions when you're paired with somebody who's dedicated to helping you succeed. And one of the things that operations people like to do is help solve problems. It's a thing that we get good at, from debugging really bizarre spanning tree protocol errors and other things that we've heard about and talked about. So that escalation helps in knowledge transfer, and everybody gets better from it, because you have this collaboration, you get team building and knowledge transfer, and it's one big happy hug ops group heart thing, DevOps culture, right? So earlier today, Gene talked about the second way, and you heard what he said about all that, right? And we've got recording of the video, so you can go back and listen to it. But he had a lot of really good information about operating applications and team collaboration, that sort of thing. So, audience participation time again. This is for science, as all my quizzes are. So by show of hands, who writes application code? Like stuff that runs the business website. All right, cool. Who writes that runs it in production? Hopefully the same hands, right? And who's a consultant that writes code for clients? This is applicable for you too, but not necessarily that you should carry pagers, because some people might get grumpy about that. But who's the first to get paged if there's a problem? So there's some advice for you on how you can help make things operable. And if you're not on call, and I'm certainly, I'm advocating for that, but some ways that you can help with this collaboration, first of all, is instrumenting the application. Like I said earlier, metrics are awesome. So gathering information about your application and getting all the data you possibly can out of it is wonderful. There's piles of monitoring tools and services. There was a whole conference about monitoring last week. All the videos for that, Monitorama, will be posted as soon as they're available. There's lots of blog posts out there. I can't possibly link to all of them, but there's other talks here. There's talks probably over the next couple days. And there's a library that Coda Hale wrote that you might have heard of called Metrics. And there's a Ruby Metrics, since we're at a Ruby conference, might be interested in the Ruby Metrics one, and it's about instrumenting your application. So helping to do that helps you build applications that operations people can look at and say, oh, here's information from the application, and here's how I can graph it. And getting that information in a way that makes those metrics relatable to the business, like the number of dollars we're losing if the site is down, really helps in operations. So making the application operable is also highly beneficial. And if you're going to be a developer that's on call, your future you is going to thank you. And so part of this is building good tools. So Chef is a tool that Opscode has built. I think it's a pretty good tool. Several of you are using it, so you probably think it's a pretty good tool. If not, you can see me after, and I'll register all your complaints. But we maintain a production application service called Hosted Chef. And Hosted Chef is a service-oriented architecture. We've got a bunch of little services running and different apps, and we deploy those apps all the time. Like, there's probably been several deploys today while we've been here at this conference, but Private Chef is hosted chef behind your firewall, and it's a thing that needed to be operable because we're going to sell this software to people that are going to install it, and they're going to operate it, but then we're going to be support, and you can call Opscode and get support for that. But there's a lot of moving parts there, and we needed a tool that would help us operate that. So there's a tool called Private Chef Cuddle, and if you've used open source Chef server, Chef 11, there's Chef Server Cuddle, and it's got some commands for managing the various services. So Private Chef Cuddle was written by our developers to help operate Private Chef, and it has things like service list, tail, reconfigure, restart specific services. Yes, there's a little Nagios inside Private Chef. It's kind of cool. The service list will give you a list of all the various services in this SOA that are running on the Private Chef server. Tail will tail the logs. You can specify a particular service. So you can get a list of the services, and then you can go look at the specific logs for that service. Makes it really helpful if you're debugging an error that came from Nagios out of this, and it tells you which service is having an issue. You can go look at that service's log files live. You can reconfigure it, so if you need to make a configuration change to fix a problem, or there's restart command, there's a bunch of other commands in here that we're able to operate Private Chef, and we can use this kind of tool across other parts of our production infrastructure. So hosted Chef is easier for the Opscode developers and our operations team to manage because we're starting to use these kinds of tools that we've written. And then Private Chef is easier for our customers and our support team to manage because they have the same tool that has access to all the various parts of the application. And these adapted tools we adapted the tool for the open source version of Chef Server as well. So building tools will make your applications operable. It'll give you insight into looking at them. So when you get paged, because now you're carrying a pager, right? When you get paged, you can go and look at the application with the tool that you wrote that already has a lot of domain knowledge, or the operations team can help with that and correlate to OS system events and that sort of thing. But this isn't just for operations, it's for future you or 3 a.m. you. And if you're a consultant, you should write tools that make it easier for your clients to operate the applications that you've delivered to them. Duh, right? I mean, this is like a huge value add that you can build into the cost of this thing that you're delivering as a consultant that they've hired to build stuff for them. But how many people actually do this in practice? I mean, I've seen a lot of different infrastructures and a lot of different kinds of consultants that they don't necessarily have all of the tooling in place because some consultants, like when I worked for this large IT services organization, they'd have consultants that come in and, okay, application's written. It's the service manager's problem now, right? And that's irresponsible. But we get this mutual benefit if you can deliver this to customers that then hire developers to maintain or operations people to continue to run this site or service that's been built. Another way you can make your applications operable is to write the automation code that is responsible for managing and deploying them. Whether that's Chef or Puppet or CF Engine or a pile of bash scripts, whatever it is that you use and that you're comfortable with and that whoever's going to be operating it is comfortable with, it matters that it works the same way across all the environments where the application is being deployed and run. So if you've got a staging environment, it needs to be, your staging environment should have the same automation tools that your production environment is going to use, right? And the developer's laptop should have all the same tools and the same automation. We heard earlier that Boxen does that for GitHub, and then they have the Puppet modules that deploy production systems there as well. So this automation helps with making it easier to operate the application. Working with the operations team to understand the OS domain of where the application is going to run helps you be able to write automation code for them to be able to use. So some takeaways. DevOps is a professional and cultural movement that its practices focus on making the business better, making the business more efficient and helps collaboration with culture and sharing. We can take the lead from other companies that have put their developers on call, and it was like earlier it was said that when an outage happens at 2 a.m. and the developer's on call, and the outage is because there was a problem in the application, that defect is going to get fixed right away. And there's probably going to be a unit or integration test to go along with it, right? Because we do test-driven development, and we can get that into production and rely on it to be correct the next time. So this also this increases responsibility and a vested interest in helping build more robust and resilient applications and services. And by having developers participate more actively in the operation of the site through response to outages, they will naturally help build better tools that will be able to operate the application, gather metrics, and be able to get more data about how the system is running. Thank you.